All right, let's get right into this. If you've had your eyes on the 2026 Korean stock market lately, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We are seeing some absolutely wild, whiplash-inducing volatility. It's the kind of market action that seriously tests your nerve, right? But stick with me today, because we're unpacking a highly structured, psychologically grounded recovery strategy straight from the DAR System Master Strategy. In this explainer, we're going to decode exactly how this system navigates all this chaos. We're talking about turning high-level, abstract market philosophy into rigid, completely actionable day trading mechanics.
And I really want to kick things off with this quote right from the source material. The end of hell is the first step to the top. Now look, if you're a retail investor who's taken some heavy hits recently, especially if you've been caught up in secondary batteries, this probably hits pretty close to home. The DAR system totally acknowledges that pain. It gets that staring at the absolute bottom of a market crash is just terrifying, but it actually uses that reality to set the stage for what comes next. Because it's not just about, surviving the drop, it's about systematically gearing up for the massive ascent that follows.
So here's our roadmap for today. We are going to cover the cosmic cycle of capital, the 5-stage execution matrix, the anatomy of 2026 leading sectors, how to endure the deep winter, and finally, the psychology you absolutely need to control greed.
All right, part 1, the cosmic cycle of capital.
Now, the foundational idea of the DAR system is that market liquidity isn't just bouncing around randomly. It actually moves in a universal, inevitable cycle, exactly like the four seasons. It takes this super technical concept of capital rotation and makes it intuitive. Think of market liquidity like a giant balloon, okay? When you squeeze one side, the other side absolutely has to expand. Looking at 2026, semiconductors and AI are basically having their summer. They are peaking right now. So the system's strategic move? Take your profits. Then you've got automobiles in autumn, giving us some nice earnings defense to hold and observe. Secondary batteries? Well, they are trapped in a brutal, deep winter crash. But here's the kicker. As all that massive liquidity rotates out of the summer sectors, it's got to go somewhere, right? It flows straight into the spring sectors, bio and retail, which are just starting to thaw out and emerge. The absolute crucial takeaway here is knowing exactly where your money sits within this seasonal cycle.
Which brings us to part 2, the 5-stage execution matrix. Okay, so once you grasp those big macro seasons, you actually need to know how to execute your trades without blowing up your account. The DAR system filters literally every single decision through these 5 incredibly rigorous stages. Stage A handles the microscopic, minute-by-minute chart movements using a mathematical concept called space-time symmetry, which is basically predicting the exact time-based rhythms of the market. Then Stage B kicks in, looking at social networks, CEO connections, and government policy. Stage C zooms out to calibrate global macroeconomics. Stage D layers on geopolitical risks, civilizational volatility, even climate change. And finally, Stage E accounts for the biggest wildcard of them all, human nature, our psychological biases, and even cosmic variables. It's a completely foolproof filter designed to take all the emotional guesswork totally out of the equation. Let's zoom in on Stage A and see what this actually looks like during a real trading day. This timeline dictates exactly when and how capital gets injected. At 8:40 a.m., you're doing your global macro risk check. At 9:15, you look at the 15-minute chart and drop in just a 10% Vanguard entry, testing the waters. By 10:30, if that trend is actually holding up on the 30 and 60-minute charts, you complete a 20% short-term position. And then finally, at 2:30 p.m., you use the 120-minute chart to confirm the space-time symmetry and hold your main position. This isn't random clicking. This systematic, staggered entry is explicitly designed to stop you from making those panicked, impulsive mistakes we're all guilty of. But hold on. How do you even know what data to trust before placing those trades? Well, for Stage C, the macro calibration, the DAR system draws a massive, strict line between two things. On the left side, we have massaged statistics. This is government data, news noise, stuff loaded with political intent. The system actively, ruthlessly strips all of that away to find what's on the right, the unmassaged truth. They call this V-real. It's the raw, undeniable flow of capital. The system insists, absolutely demands that you ignore the noise and focus purely on the real signal of volume and liquidity.
Moving on to part 3, the anatomy of 2026 leading sectors.
So let's take that 5-stage matrix and that strict filter for the truth and apply it directly to the 2026 market. What do we actually find? Well, if we look at momentum, just like we talked about with the seasons, AI semiconductors have had a massive run. They are at their summer peak. But the system is flashing warning signs. This is the time to start carefully taking profits. The true rising stars, the spring sectors that are transitioning out of the cold, are bio and pharma, which are shooting up fast. Right alongside them are energy storage systems, or ESS, and batteries. The system calculates that these are bottoming out right now and have this massive coiled-up potential for a V-shaped recovery.
You might be wondering why bio and retail specifically. The source material points to some very specific catalysts. For bio, you've got incredible momentum coming from things like the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, plus huge expectations for technology exports. As for retail and financials, they're getting a massive boost from government value-up programs that target low price-to-book ratios. On top of that, these sectors act as brilliant defensive safe havens because they offer strong dividend yields. The DAR system essentially flags these as the absolute perfect spring investments to bulletproof your portfolio while the broader market goes through these crazy volatile adjustments.
Which brings us to part 4, how to endure the deep winter. All right, we simply cannot talk about 2026 without addressing the massive elephant in the room, the sheer pain so many investors are feeling in the battery sector right now. When will the deep winter end for secondary batteries? Look, if you're holding these stocks, you aren't just wondering when the bleeding stops, you are absolutely begging for it. But the DAR system doesn't do hope. It relies on specific mathematical triggers that systematically signal the exact end of this agonizing crash.
According to the material, if you see these 3 triggers line up, it mathematically guarantees a V-shaped rebound. Number 1. The stock has to hit the absolute bottom of its historical price channel, the envelope indicator, while simultaneously completing a 256-day cycle. That's that space-time symmetry we talked about, marking the definitive end of a 1-year downward energy wave. Number 2, you need to see a Bollinger Band squeeze. This is that precise moment where price volatility completely compresses, almost like a coiled spring, right before it breaks out, followed by the price candle re-entering the band. And number 3, the real fundamental trigger, the dawn of the ESS supercycle. Because while electric vehicle demand might be slowing down, AI data centers are suddenly creating an insatiable new demand for energy storage. And that is exactly what will drive the 2026 recovery.
And if you are following this closely, the system pinpoints one highly specific number you need to burn into your brain: 102,400 Korean won for SK Innovation. The source material defines this exact, to-the-tick price as the absolute bottom of the Elliott fifth wave. In plain English, that is the final, agonizingly exhausting downward push in a market cycle. It's the ultimate deep winter stress test before spring finally arrives. The system is telling us, if you see this number hit, you are looking at the most fertile possible soil for the massive rebound that follows. Finally, part 5, psychology to control greed.
This brings us to what is honestly the most fascinating element of the whole DAR system. Because listen, you can memorize all the 256-day symmetries and envelope indicators in the world, but the system flat out insists that your technicals are completely useless if you can't master your own psychology. To explain this, the system uses a really brilliant medical metaphor, the endoloop. In surgery, an endoloop is a literal tie used to ligate, or shut off, a bleeding blood vessel. In the DAR system, the endoloop is the psychological tourniquet you have to apply to your own brain to suppress the overwhelming urge to panic sell. Think about it. When SK Innovation crashes down to that terrifying 102,401 mark, your entire biological instinct is going to scream at you to run. Applying the endoloop is how you physically stop your finger from clicking that sell button in the darkest hour, making sure you don't hand your deeply discounted shares right over to the institutions right before it rockets back up.
And you know, surviving the drop is only half the battle. It's also about what you do when you actually win. The system mandates an incredibly strict profit allocation rule. You put 90% right back into reinvestment and holdings, but that last 10%, that is completely dedicated to what it calls the karma of sharing. The text makes a really profound argument here. It says that to achieve true financial liberation, what it literally calls escaping labor, you have to give 10% of your profits back to the world. Now, this isn't just about being charitable. The system views this as a hardcore psychological hack to prevent you from being totally consumed by greed. It keeps your mind clear, and it keeps your trading absolutely disciplined. It's just a beautiful way to tie these rigid, cutthroat day trading mechanics back to a much larger life philosophy. A strategy that does not fail blossoms on the flower of sharing. It's a great reminder that the ultimate goal of decoding these cosmic capital cycles isn't just to hoard a bunch of wealth. It's about mastering our own human nature so we can actually finally find freedom. So here is the crucial question we are left with today. The DAR system has given us the tools, the execution matrices, the exact price targets. They are all laid out on the table. But the final execution? That is entirely on you. So will you master the space-time symmetry of the market? Apply that endoloop when the winter feels unbearably cold and practice the karma of sharing?
Or are you going to let fear and greed dictate your actions? The seasons of capital are going to turn no matter what we do. It is entirely up to you to decide how you're going to ride them.